If you're a Calgarian and you're watching this video, I assume you're already very well aware of the petition floating around attempting to gather signatures to recall Calgary's radical progressive and deeply incompetent mayor, Mayor Jyoti Gondek. I fully encourage all of you to find a way of signing this petition or even getting involved to gather signatures yourselves. It's a very healthy practice in trying to hold corrupt politicians accountable, incompetent politicians accountable. At the same time, though, I will say that it's very unlikely that this recall movement will actually succeed. At the very least, it will gather a lot of data to be able to use to try and elect a real conservative mayoral candidate in the next election. But at the same time, the Recall Act in Alberta, passed in 2021 under Kenny's UCP government, effectively makes it so that you can't recall any politicians, at least not a politician in a large jurisdiction. The Recall Act in Alberta makes it so you need 40% of all registered voters to sign a petition within 60 days, a paper petition only, in order to get rid of an incompetent elected official. And even then, they still have a chance of being reelected in the recall election that is then triggered if you get the 40% of signatures. And they do, signature verification, all the details of people who signed it verified. And if you even mess up on one name and that puts you below 40%, the petition does not go through. It's incredibly unfair, and obviously Kenny and the UCP in the middle of COVID only passed this in order to pretend that they take holding democratically elected officials accountable seriously. At the same time, they made it so it's effectively impossible to hold anyone accountable. You would need in Calgary 8,800 signatures per day, every day of the 60-day period in order to recall Gondek. There's just too many people who are checked out. Even if they dislike her, they're too checked out to actually pay attention enough to sign the petition. At the same time, again, we might be able to get hundreds of thousands of Calgarians to show support for anyone but Gondek, who we can move towards a more conservative candidate later. But now I just want to turn my attention to just who Jyoti Gondek is. I don't care about who she is personally, doesn't matter to me. What I care about is who is she as a politician? What is her movement and how did she get elected into office? Because if anything, she's a fairly who cares counselor before she was mayor. She's a high-spending, anti-police kind of mayor that usually would not appeal to a typical Calgary voter. Yes, you might say, well, Calgary voters voted in Bronkanye and Nenshi back in the day, but at the very least, they both acted like softer liberals. They didn't go too hard and end up sort of getting a bunch of conservatives out there to rally against them. Nenshi almost had conservatives rally against him in like 17 with Bill Smith, but at the same time, there just wasn't a strong enough conservative candidate in order to get conservatives to turn out. That was also the problem in 21. Farkas and Jeff Davison, at least in my opinion, ended up taking each other out because neither of them were the obvious conservative, so they ended up splitting each other's votes. And even if you combine them together, I think they would have still been beaten by Gondek. But regardless, I want to get into specifically who Gondek is. Who Gondek is effectively a union-backed Manchurian candidate. I don't mean that in the conspiratorial way where she's just, been activated to act as a hyper-progressive when she really wasn't before. Everyone knew she was a hyper-progressive candidate, but she ran as a candidate who cares about the taxpayer, not going to raise taxes, not going to do anything crazy, just going to rely on highly effective social services. But then she gets in and starts doing all this climate emergency stuff, bans plastic bags, starts trying to force people to pay for their bags at fast food restaurants, raises property taxes every single year she's been mayor despite running on a tax freeze, all this other stuff. And the reason that she flipped so quickly is because all of her money for her campaign, not directly for her campaign, but all the money that ended up trying to boost her campaign was mostly union money. And so she freaked out today on Twitter at the very good Ward 13 councillor, Dan McLean, because he simply shared a CBC article about all the money that went to third-party advertisers because the most amount of money went towards an organization that was effectively just a union front group in order to get Gondek and a slate of other union-backed councillors onto council. So look at this. This is her response to Dan McLean, who didn't even exactly swipe at her directly. He just quoted the article, and now she's mad. She said, "My dude, maybe attending meetings in person instead of phoning in from a golf cart should be your top priority." And now, while that's true, Dan McLean did skip a couple meetings and was golfing while on Zoom. Yeah, that did happen, and it's bad. At the same time, Dan McLean's a far better counselor than Jyoti Gondek ever was and would be a far better mayor if he was mayor. I actually don't blame him for going golfing. Council's pretty incompetent, and it's full of progressives who he cannot convince on any policy. So, if anything, I would say golf away, Dan, and even apologize for that. So, her bringing it up just is very petty. But that's a response to Dan just bringing up the fact that Calgary's Future, again, a union front group, was able to raise $1.7 million for the 2021 election. It had a bigger budget than I believe than any other mayoral campaign, and I think it was probably many of the mayoral campaigns combined. It had a bigger budget then, and a lot of its money came from unions. As a union or a corporation, you're actually allowed to donate up to $30,000 to a third-party advertiser, and every union associated with Calgary ended up maxing out donations to Calgary's Future, and then many union members who are very loyal to the political causes the union backs also gave large donations out. Probably not $30,000 donations, but it was obvious that the vast majority of people who were basically funding Calgary's Future were union activists or progressive activists. Jyoti Gondek ran as a very bland, slightly liberal politician, and then when she gets into office, she starts attacking parents for not liking drag queen story hours and raising taxes. And it's purely because the people funding her, who she has to please in order for them to do the same third-party advertising racket for her again, wants her to raise taxes and do all this hyper-progressive stuff because she funnels a lot of money into more union jobs, raises the wages of union members, just like Nenshi did. In 2020, when there was less work for any union member to do than ever before because it was during the pandemic, they were given like 16% wage raises. It was nuts. And Jyoti Gondek has been doing the same thing. Union wages in Calgary, the civil workers' wages, have been skyrocketing. There's a reason that although she fearmongers against developers, and many developers funded third-party advertisers associated with Jeff Davison, they also funded her campaign because at the very least, she will potentially give individual developers favors to build housing on land that was previously blocked from like actually being developed. It's not because that land shouldn't be developed, but it's because like if you want anything done, you have to kind of sidle up to certain politicians who might give you waivers to be able to speed up the approval process for those actual developments to start. But here is a chart that a friend of mine posted to Facebook showing just how much money was given to like Calgary's Future and spent. They had about $1.7 million given to them. And they were advertising before and after the mayoral election, before in order to get progressives to unite behind them, and then after in order to push progressive policy during council sessions. But they spent $506,000 during the election. That's more, I believe, than the vast majority of the mayoral campaigns, as much as people go after Alberta Proud. Oh, it's a conservative front group funded by conservatives to elect conservatives. They only spent $24,000. It's a obvious grassroots organization. If it wasn't grassroots, I think they would have raised more than a single maxed out donation. They did not. Calgary's Future, when you look at the people elected council, it's almost all Calgary's Future candidates outside of a few ridings where they backed a progressive in a riding that was just so conservative that they were obviously going to elect a man like Richard Pootmans, and even Dan McLean barely won. When I say barely won, he actually won with a pretty sizable margin, but he ran against an incumbent council candidate who was deeply incompetent and progressive. And then there was a Calgary Future candidate that was also probably going to be incompetent, but also super progressive. So they took each other out, and then Dan McLean came up the middle in that riding, getting like 40% of the vote. That's great that happened. But in the future, in order to get rid of Gondek, either we need laws cracking down on how third-party advertisers can get money. I don't think that corporations and unions should be giving money. Individuals should be giving money. Or at the very least, open it up so at least there can be municipal parties. Because the problem is in Calgary is that nobody seems like the union candidate on paper. They all run as a mild-mannered liberal, a mild-mannered, slightly progressive person who cares about the taxpayer. And then they get in and they immediately flip and just start doing everything they can for the unions. So at the very least, we should at least have a party brand that goes with each council candidate so that people can identify over time which ones are the lefties and which ones are the conservatives. Because conservatives will start winning in Calgary if the conservatives realize who the obvious conservatives in the area are. That's why for mayor, even if we don't have municipal parties, we need a conservative mayoral candidate who is the obvious conservative mayoral candidate. Rob Ford is deeply out of step with the typical liberal progressive culture of Toronto, but every single conservative got behind him when he won the mayoral race back in, I think, like 2013 or so, because he was the obvious conservative. The problem in Calgary is you had Jeff Davison, you had Jeremy Farkas, you had Zane Novak, and you had a few other people who were decently conservative, all splitting the vote. It's not the voters' fault for not getting behind one of them. It's frankly their fault for not being the obvious enough conservative that everyone can consolidate. They were each a little bit more conservative on a different issue, and then they were each kind of progressive on other issues. So the conservative vote ended up getting confused and not showing up. It's the problem with Aaron O'Toole federally, and it's the problem with our municipal candidates locally. Anyways, that's a bit of a rant for me, but this is really who Gondek is. She is a union front. And in future, Calgarians need a mayoral candidate for the Conservatives who is an obvious conservative who we can get by. We need a Pierre Poilievre or a Rob Ford to run for mayor so that we understand who the man is we need to back in order to defeat the progressive union activists. Anyways, that's it for me today. I don't believe the Recall Gondek people have a actual site up yet. I will endorse Cian Bexty's recallgondek.ca website. I believe he's just doing an online petition, but I believe he will be connecting you with the places you can go in order to sign the anti-Gondek official paper petition. It's key that at least we get 100,000 people to sign this to demonstrate that Calgarians do not like Gondek. Anyways, that should be it for me today. I'll see you guys in my next video. Again, I'm running for the Calgary Signal Hill Conservative Party nomination. My name is Wyatt Claypool. Check out my website in the description below. Also, if you live in that area of Calgary, it'd be great if you'd all back me because we need real conservatives representing strong conservative ridings. If you like my videos, you'll definitely like me in Parliament. So try and do that for me. Buy a membership. Vote for me if you live in Calgary Signal Hill.